G'day everyone. If you watched one of my last videos, you'll know I witnessed an epic showdown between the Casio AE1200 and Synoke 9619. And while I won't spoil the outcome for those that didn't watch it, I neglected to write up a separate review of a Synoke beforehand. Until now, that is. So let's grab a cuppa and settle into reviewing the Synoke 9619 Luminous. So here's the specs list with all the details, including physical dimensions, weight, water resistance, crystal, movement, and price. And like most AliExpress offerings, if you're willing to be patient or use special deals or coupons, you might be able to pick this up for a bit less than the listed price. And that pricing perfectly segues into the pros of the Synoke. For $10, you'd expect to get something that's pretty garbage or unreliable. And while this watch is a far cry from perfection, it genuinely surprised me. If you've worn the cheaper Casio watches, especially with Casio Royale, then the Synoke will be a familiar story with its screen layout, buttons, resin case shape, and band. Not the strongest or sturdiest of materials, but it's lightweight, feels solid enough to withstand some abuse, and will survive an accidental drop, at least from wrist height. And in spite of the fact that the case thickness is delving into diver territory, the smaller dimensions help to make it more manageable and wearable on the wrist. The 4 button pushes, 2 on each side, help to select and change the various settings on the Synoke. One thing I really appreciate about them is how tactile and responsive they are to each push. You can really feel the input and response on each press. A very minor detail, but a welcome one nonetheless. Moving further into the dial and past the black bezel edge, you have a digital display that is reminiscent of the Casio Royale. Very similar in layout, but the content is noticeably different. In the main display below, you have the current time with the month and date just above this in smaller text, and a smaller P on the left-hand side if you're using 12-hour time, then it's after midday but before midnight. Just above that in the middle, you have a 2-letter display that shows the day of the week in its abbreviated form. And further above that, you have a smaller display to indicate the time and whether an alarm or hourly chime is being configured or not. And I will quickly mention that I do love the crisp beep sound it emits. It's not deafening, but compared to some other digital offerings, it is noticeably more audible. And finally, in the top left-hand corner, you have an analog digital display. At least that's what I think it is, but I'll mention that later. As for functionality, the Synoke has the ability to display the current time, day, date, and month, with an option to view a second time zone, set an alarm, and use a stopwatch for timekeeping purposes. By digital watch standards, it's pretty limited, but considering it's only $10 and still has greater practicality than nearly any analog watch on the market, it's still impressive. But what impressed me the most with the Synoke was its backlight. To be honest, I was expecting it to be about as bright as a candle in a blizzard, but I was very, very wrong. The light clearly illuminates every digital facet of this watch, including the time, which is the most important element. But what makes it incredible is that you can hold the light button down to change the backlight color. On last check, there were 7 different colors to choose from, with an 8th option being this Technicolor Ray flashing scheme, something to draw attention to yourself in a dark room, but I do hope Casio are paying attention. But not everything that flashes is horological gold. Like the Casio Royale, the Synoke has the same word spaghetti dilemma, with descriptive text littering the dial and case. Some details, such as button identification, are useful, but some text, including the Luminous text below, seems very superfluous. The supplied resin strap is comfortable enough to wear, but when you live in a hotter, humid climate, you tend to sweat more, and after prolonged wear, the strap will feel a bit chafy and uncomfortable to wear. So in my instance, short-term wear is fine, but if you're out in the heat for longer periods, you'll wish you were wearing something nicer. The acrylic crystal on the Synoke does its job to protect the watch, but any knocks or scrapes will show up clear as day. But like other acrylic crystals, you could just use some polywash to buff out the worst of it, but for a $10 watch, I'm not sure if many would bother to do it. The steel caseback does its duty well and says what it needs to say, but I can't help but feel that swimming logo is a bit misleading, which now leads me into the negatives of the Synoke. And for the low price of $10, there are definitely going to be some low points about this watch. For starters, it only comes with 30 meters of water resistance, so this will limit how wet the Synoke can get. But in its defense, I did put it through a water torture test by giving it a decent splash and fully submerge it for a little over 5 minutes. Hardly scuba diving levels, but outside of swimming duties, it can still handle itself. The information that's displayed on the screens could be described as a missed opportunity at best and almost useless at worst. The smaller square display with the day of the week might be useful information for some and benefit those with limited vision, but it just feels like a waste. They could have done more with this by adding extra information or setting up a different function and incorporating the day display into the main time viewer, a la Casio style. But the biggest gripe about the screen is that circular time display in the top left hand corner. The numbering around that mini dial makes it appear to be a second timer, but the digital lines just appear as a random kaleidoscope dancing around the display. Beyond some visual eye candy, I'm still trying to figure out what it does or if it has a functional purpose. And as a small grumble, I wish that Synoke had included a mute feature on this piece. As much as I appreciate those audible beeps, it can be grating for others in earshot if you're flicking through various settings, or if you're a secret agent and don't want your cover blown. And ultimately, some enthusiasts, myself included, will compare the Synoke to the Casio Royale, given they share a similar design. And then it becomes obvious that the Synoke plays second fiddle to the Royale due to the absence of a countdown timer, the limitations of setting multiple time zones and alarms, reduced water resistance, and shorter battery lifespan. Now don't get me wrong, the Synoke still offers great value for money as a functional, reliable watch with some useful features and an almost mind-blowing backlight. And it can be yours for the price of a takeaway pizza or two. But the reality is that you can still buy a Royale for just under 60 Aussie dollars, and because a comparison will be drawn between these two, the Royale's features and functions blow the Synoke out of the water. And if you're in a position where you had to choose between these two watches, I'd push you towards the Royale. But if you're looking for a watch and money is tight, or you want a cheap and cheerful gift for someone, or if backlights in the dark are your thing, I'd happily recommend the Synoke for the price. If you've owned or still wear a Synoke, I'd like to hear your thoughts about it. But that's it for now, and thanks for watching, eh?